Well, most of us would rather plan a holiday or even a renovation or maybe even a root canal than sit down and talk honestly about what happens when we die. And yet, I think few conversations are probably more important or more loving, because proper estate planning isn't really about death. If you think about it, it's about dignity, it's about clarity, it's about leaving the people who you love and are left behind with as little chaos at that precise moment when the people we love are least equipped to deal with it. So I think many people believe that if they've signed a will, that's it. That's underlined, they're covered. But as today's guest, Maryanne Leicher, reminds us, the will is only one part of the picture. It doesn't govern everything, and it doesn't necessarily solve for things like liquidity, and it doesn't automatically deal with retirement funds or living annuities. So there's a lot that we need to get into. And again, when you're emotional, the numbers are practical, but a good estate plan needs both the practical side and the emotional side covered. So together today with Kim Potgieter in studio, we're going to unpack what good estate planning looks like. Kim, great to see you again. You're looking well-travelled and well-rested as well.
I've been travelling way too much.
And Maryanne, lovely to meet you. Thanks so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you, Michael.
Something, and just for listeners, you're a CA, you're a CFP, you're a financial planning specialist. You've got a deep interest in estate planning, not just as a technical exercise, but as a way of just bringing this kind of clarity at the right moment. And I was very interested by something that you wrote about in your work with clients, that you often begin with, I think it's quite a confronting but a necessary question. What would happen today if you had passed away last night? And I think it's a question that really peels back a lot of layers. It forces us to think quite deeply about this. What are the most common blind spots that emerge when you pose that question to your clients?
Michael, I think very much, their response is, I've never really thought about it, but I have a signed will, so I'm sorted. Case by case, clients are different, family dynamics are different, but very much clients never really give it a lot of thought. I get varying answers. I get, well, I'm not here, so it won't be my problem. Other answers would be, you know what, this is actually what keeps me up at night. I was waiting for that question. I was waiting for the step in the process. So very much, I love to say to clients, let's have a look at your will, but let's take a step back. I want to put numbers to it and put it into perspective for you.
And Kim, this idea, this issue of estate planning just being covered by a will and then you can move on, how prevalent is that in the meetings that you have when you talk about this aspect of financial planning?
I would say, and I could say 99% of clients that we meet that are new clients that come into our business have never ever done an estate plan. And it's often because I ask all new clients that come through the process how they found the process. And people tell me that this is the part of the process that helps them sleep well at night, because they didn't understand what it is. So it's again what you didn't know. But the reason we've been doing it and the reason we've found it so valuable is because we wind up estates. And then we get presented with wills. But when there hasn't been thought that's gone into the will and structuring that's gone into the will, we see how many bad decisions are made because of a will that didn't actually speak to the holistic viewpoint of it. So the estate planning actually has been something that we now do with clients. We won't do a will. We won't write a will for you if you don't have an estate plan, because what we found is those wills get us into trouble because we don't understand the full context of it.
And I think there's often a conflation in most people's minds that a will is an estate plan.
Exactly.
And the two are two very different documents, very different processes. So what is the distinction, Maryanne, from where you sit between a will and an estate plan?
So for me, very much, the will for me is the implementation of the estate plan. So the estate, it's the final step, and it's only one part of the final step. The estate plan is taking a step back and looking at the whole picture, as Kim said, and considering all aspects, emotional, as you mentioned, technical. There's so much more than just a written will that's validly signed and in place.
And you tell the story of your first will, your Jack Russell, Dachshund Jerry, and your new Audi, and a few cash bequests, and the fact that nobody asked for your personal balance sheet. What did that experience teach you later once you became a CFP?
Looking back, as I said, I was quite perturbed that they didn't actually put Jerry in my will. He's still going, by the way. He's 16 years old. But the cash bequest relating to him, it actually should have been in the will. And I was quite perturbed that I wasn't ever asked for, what actually do you have to fund these cash bequests? It was very will specific. I had just started my new job, so I was contributing to a retirement fund, but beneficiary nominations on that retirement fund didn't even come up in the conversation.
Wow. And I mean, that's one of the first things you actually should be thinking about is who are those people who are, left behind? What am I leaving to them? What do I not want to leave to them? I mean, it seems rather obvious, though, if you think about what kind of, do I want a living annuity or a life annuity? Because those products also have different outcomes depending on what your estate plan looks like. So it really is quite holistic. The one speaks to the other.
Very much so. We always say to clients, we've got a blank canvas. Let's do your estate plan. Let's write your will, and let's together determine your beneficiary nominations. But it doesn't stop there. As life happens, we look at it every year, and it goes in tandem, beneficiary nominations and the will to talk to one another. Very different implications, Michael. If you'd like me to unpack those, I can.
Yeah, we will. But I think maybe just before we unpack some of that detail, Maryanne, I think there's, again, a common misconception that we only need to have wills and estate plans much later on in life. And on Life Chapters Money Choices, Kim, you and I, we've spoken about various transitions, financial, emotional, that we have in life, and they start very early on, very young. Is there a rule of thumb as to when you should really realistically start thinking about having an estate plan? Because I think a lot of our financial planning, if started incorrectly, impacts that estate plan later on in life, doesn't it?
So I would, and I always say to people that ask me that question, if you have assets, you should have an estate plan. If you have dependents, you should have an estate plan. So dependents are obviously one that comes later in life. And so then, it's even more important. But when you have assets, you should have this estate plan. But just also to bring it into context, estate plan has to be seen in the context of a whole financial plan. So many people will come in and say, well, just do an estate plan for me. But that's when we start actually investing in the wrong products, and we start giving the wrong advice comes in. So importantly, and it's what we discuss often, you first start with the life plan. What does my life look like, and what do I want it to look like?
Yeah.
Then you can go into that scenario plan and work out all the different investment choices that you will have in order to give you this life you want. And then only we come to the estate planning. And clients often try and make us go first to the estate plan and then come back to the life plan. But we've seen it, and we've worked, and we've been doing this for over 20 years. It's important to do the process in the stages, because we learn so much about a person in their life plan that they wouldn't necessarily think to tell us in their estate plan. And that's when we hear about the people that are important to them, the dependents, the dynamics in families, because there's always dynamics in families, and that always needs to be taken account of in this estate planning. And that's where we can really give advice and really be worth something to our clients, because we're taking all of this holistic viewpoint, and we're making sure that we're not just giving this one part advice, because again, every time we do it, we see how much things are missing.
Yeah.
And then when the things are missing, it's hard to come back. Then you must change it all. So very importantly, it is to follow this process. And when you come to the estate planning, you're now ready for it, because we've set the scene. We've unpacked, we always call it the puzzle of their life. We've unpacked all these pieces. And for us, the estate planning is then the closing of it all. And it's the final piece, so that we can make sure that all aspects have been taken care of.
So that then brings us into the situation where now we want to sit down and we want to have a proper estate planning conversation, Maryanne. What should a conversation include that a basic will drafting exercise often misses when we're talking about a proper estate plan?
So, Michael, sorry, just to Kim's point, before preparing for that estate plan, I go back to the life plan and I read it, and I concentrate on really listening to the client, what came through for me, their values, what really keeps them up at night. And for example, if there's three children, 2 have done well and 1 hasn't, I take that really deeply with me in my conversation as I enter that estate planning meeting, to tell the client that I've heard you. And it's not just about numbers and the taxes and the liquidity and the technical aspects. It's very much the full puzzle box picture. So for me, I think the conversation is, I've heard you, we've built this relationship through this journey so far. The life planning report is golden for estate planning, I feel. And I want to show the client that I am hearing them on what's keeping them up at night and my solutions for that.
Yeah, and we've got to, we put numbers to your wishes, as you put it. Let's take that example. So I come to you and we've done the financial planning work with Chartered. We then think about, now, how do we fold this into a proper estate plan? And you do have 3 children, 2 have done fairly well. The one perhaps hasn't done as well. And part of you thinks, should I just leave a third? Or do I approach this from a position of love and bring the family in and say, as much as I'd like to, I think it's only right that I give a little bit more to the struggling sibling. It's a difficult conversation to have. Where does one begin with that conversation, Maryanne?
So I think it's unpacking the family dynamics. In those cases, what I've seen, Michael, is parents who are clients have already financially assisted that one child, for example. I've had practical experience in how do we equate that in the will. You don't want to really disadvantage your other 2 children for doing well in life. So in that way, I think family dynamics is number 1. Are you a family to openly speak about money, to openly speak about when mom and dad are no longer here, what will we be left with? How close are the siblings? Never mind their status in life. In the one aspect, some clients say, I just want to keep it equal, even though I know my one child's struggling. Another aspect, clients, it's a family that can talk about money openly, and they say, my other 2 that are perhaps overseas or have done really well, they'll be fine with leaving their brother or sister a little bit more. So it's just for me asking the right questions to see how the family deals with those conversations.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not even about money at all. It's just about that family painting on the lounge wall, or a scarf that was maybe quite precious to someone. So these things can run quite deep, Kim, from an emotional perspective, psychological perspective as well.
So again, for that, and it's part of this whole estate plan, we would get a letter of wishes from our clients. So there's many assets that you can put into a letter of wishes, and in that letter of wishes, we will state for those paintings, for those different things, and rather have worked it out before they pass away instead of leaving the children to work it all out. So that's the level of detail that goes into an estate plan, where we do a letter of wishes, and those are the discussions we have, and we like to bring the families in. So this is a different thing. We all used to the movies where when somebody passes away, they get called in and they read this will for the first time. Part of the estate planning process that we encourage is, if you've got adult children, that they're part of the process, that they're in these discussions. So we will facilitate them coming in. So there's no surprise.
Yeah.
I think death is hard enough that when you've got to deal with death, you should be using all your energy to grieve, and not to for the first time hear what's going to happen, and then all of the family dynamics can come out, and some of those family dynamics can't be sorted out because the person that they want to ask the questions to is no longer there. So our first choice is that families do get involved in it.
I've always wondered where that social convention comes from, apart from maybe good Agatha Christie novels or whodunits, where everyone gets together and, there's a big will reading and surprise. Why? What purpose did that ever serve?
I think it's just the movies.
It's very curious to me, because I would imagine your route and your preferred manner of approaching this openly, transparently, is a much better way to ensure that you have alignment, agreement, less of a shock and surprise. And if there are any wrinkles or creases, then maybe you can iron them out ahead of time. And not leave that as kind of a ticking time bomb for someone else to deal with when you're gone.
It's our first choice, but we still do have it a lot where people are they keep what they've got as their assets close to themselves. And they've been taught all the years that these conversations around money are not
taboo.
They're taboo and they don't want to have them. So it's still a process. For some people, Michael, they just won't do it. For other clients, they're open to doing it, but it very much comes back to the first part of what is your relationship like with money. I mean, the one thing is early in our life, when we're very young, we've already got a relationship with money, and we've still got a relationship with money when we in our death time. So it's all to do with that relationship that they have with money.
And Kim, this is really where money and meaning meet. And I remember one of our first conversations around launching this podcast was to incorporate that why, that almost Simon Sinek kind of thing. Like, how important is it for families to talk about the why behind the wishes, and not just the numbers, not just the technical distribution of the assets, but this is actually why I'm doing what I'm doing or making the decision that I'm making.
That helps for healthy family dynamics. But like we all know, we are complicated beings. Our relationship with money is complicated. Often our relationship with our family members is complicated. So it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
The most valuable contribution that we make to families is when they're open to this and we can facilitate all of it instead of leaving the dynamics that can carry on for generations to come. And I mean it's for generations to come. If you find out that your parents have left you out because they're upset with you or they're cross with you and they passed away, you can never fix that because they're already gone. And that's why these brave, courageous conversations happen in the estate planning, and that's why the will is such a small aspect to this all.
And we're just talking about your typical nuclear family. Now we're not even getting into the weeds of divorced families with ex-wives, different children, and expectations around that, and what happens to retirement funds and annuities. Let's move it maybe into the realm of, practical advice around will assets versus non-will assets, Maryanne. And I think one of the most important points is that not all assets are governed by your will. And I'm not sure many people will be 100% aware of that. Let's just unpack that carefully. What are will assets?
So, Michael, will assets, and you're quite right, a lot of people think their will governs everything. Will assets would be more like your lifestyle assets. So your home, your holiday homes, cars, bank accounts, timeshare, things like that, share portfolios, and a number of sort of liquid investments. Anything in your name that is actually not beneficiary nominated is what your will actually governs. And you've got freedom of testation in South Africa, so you can leave whomever, whatever you like. There's no limitation. As a common law country versus, other civil law countries where that's limited or there's no freedom of testation. But very much will assets, they're governed by your will, and that's when we unpack liquidity and taxes, and that's where we actually manage.
Not the dog.
There we go. Exactly. We unpack, basically the master's office takes 18 months minimum for a simple estate. Those will assets are frozen, but not necessarily not still invested in the market. So there's a lot of education around will assets, how they're governed by the will. In contrast to that, beneficiary nominated assets, we term them a chartered non-will assets. The will actually, as long as you've nominated a beneficiary, the will has no say over those assets. And a lot of people don't realize that. So it's so important to keep those beneficiary nominations in check when you look at your will as well. Very much if there's no beneficiary nomination, that could be a problem. And that could be circumvented just with a little bit of education on this estate planning journey with a client.
What happens if you haven't nominated a beneficiary? Does that then fall under the purview of the master's office to decide?
So basically it would head to your estate and automatically become a will asset, and there's a lot of taxes to be paid that could have been avoided, and a lot of delay in your heirs and beneficiaries receiving that. So just small practical tips to always have a nomination, unless it's your intention for it to go to the estate.
Yeah. When an estate is frozen, and I think that's another important issue to consider here, is there are still costs that need to be paid and that are incurred through the process. What does that actually mean for the surviving family?
So that's where I like to link estate planning with our financial planning, and scenario planning is partners, spouses, they must really have liquidity in each of their names. We do something called a dependency plan. So very much, let's say in the olden days, husband was the breadwinner, wife was stay at home, she had nothing in her name. Now imagine there's no beneficiary nominated assets. She'd wait minimum 18 months to actually just carry on living. So I know life's evolved since then, but very much when we do financial planning, our advice before we even get to the estate planning is to have assets in both spouses' names and to make sure, life unfortunately does have to carry on, bills still need to be paid, irrespective of the winding up of the estate.
And there's some practical things to consider here, because you may have maybe a separate account for a liquidity event, but to access that account today on a phone where everything is biometrically authorized and two-factor authentication, what happens then if your account is frozen and whatever bank says, no, we can't allow you access to this? So what are some practical tips to ensure that there is liquidity and you don't encounter any issues with accessing those funds as a surviving family member?
So very much having bank accounts in your own names. I know in South Africa we don't have a joint bank account, but having bank accounts in your own names, and while that person's still with you, special power of attorney at a bank is quite good to put in place in terms of being allowed to access that person's account. When they're no longer with you, unfortunately, I would say tell the banks last, to be honest, so that those accounts aren't frozen. But at the same time, leave cash in there for liquidity for the estate. And again, that's been guided through the estate planning process.
Yeah.
Maybe just to add there, as part of the whole estate planning process is also to have a digital estate. So it's something that a digital, because we don't understand all these passwords. You say, but people haven't actually documented the different passwords. So you can't even get off your Facebook if you don't know how to log into somebody's Facebook. It's something that you can see for many people. It stays around for months afterwards. So we always get everybody to document all of these passwords. Obviously, they have to be put in a very safe place, because that also allows for these kind of things not to happen. Life insurance also comes in here, and that's why you can't do estate planning without the financial planning, because for many people they'll say, well, I have life insurance, but what they haven't taken into account are all the costs of unfortunately winding up an estate. So we have estate duty, which we can go into, but we also have other taxes that haven't been paid. So these life insurance policies become very important. But again, two ways. We see some people are way overinsured, but they've never actually done the estate plan to actually do what Maryanne does with them, is to do this allocation of where all the different assets are going to go. And many times the life insurance policy gets paid a lot quicker if the beneficiary is nominated. So the other part of the family can live on that while they're waiting for the estate to be wound up. So it's lots of nuances and levels to this all in order to actually, to unpack it properly. Maryanne can maybe go through a little bit more of those non-wool assets. Because those non-wool assets, we've done the wool assets, are very helpful because they come a lot earlier than the wool assets.
So what are we talking about there? Is that retirement funds, living annuities, life insurance, that kind of? What are non-wool assets, Maryanne?
Exactly that, Michael. So included in that would be like offshore wrappers. You've heard the term offshore wrappers that are beneficiary nominated. So non-wool assets, very much as Kim said, and quite rightly so, that they paid quite quickly, which can provide that liquidity for a surviving partner or surviving spouse. A little distinction that's very important important actually between retirement funds and living annuities that a lot of people also are not aware of is retirement funds, they're bound by the Pension Funds Act, so the trustees have a duty to search for financial dependents, rightly so. So yes, you can keep your beneficiary nominations up to date, but it does take a lot longer for those trustees to release the funds because they've got to do this financial dependent investigation, and they may identify dependents that are mirrored on your beneficiary nomination, and then that's fine. But things like your pension fund, provident fund, when you've left a job and you've preserved those funds, if you've got your own retirement annuity, they all fall under the ambit of trustees doing that investigation. What we practically do sometimes, and again it's a letter of wishes, but it could provide context, is warn a client about that and say, look, these are my only financial dependents, ID numbers, full names, and they're mirrored on my beneficiary nomination. The trustees still have to do their investigations, but it could provide context.
How long does that process typically take?
I've heard in practice, the worst case I've heard is about a year, which is quite tough.
Wow.
And I think it's provider dependent. But yeah, it's always good to be aware of that, particularly with minor children. And I think that's where what Kim mentioned, the life cover comes into play. So with a pension, with a living annuity, and with life cover, they fall under a different act. And luckily there's no trustee discretion. So whoever you nominate as your beneficiary, that moves a lot quicker, which is awesome in terms of liquidity, guided by us for the beneficiaries.
It's also why I think living annuities are so popular. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole. I think the ASISA numbers show that given that we're not saving enough for retirement, I think there is some degree of overselling of living annuities. I'm not sure it's the right product for everyone. And I think we toggle too much and we draw down too quickly without having sufficient funds, and you can end up in a lot of trouble. I like the hybrid option of maybe blending a living with a guaranteed. Again, don't want to go too much down a rabbit hole here, but what would you say is the key distinction between a living annuity and having a pension or retirement fund when it comes to your estate planning?
I would say flexibility and liquidity, immediate liquidity. It probably would take about a month to move that living annuity to the beneficiary's name.
Wow.
Which is a lot better than 18 months or 2 years. And it also gives flexibility. Why I say flexibility and liquidity is that beneficiary, through our guidance, they could take part of that as a cash lump sum. There is some tax implications. If they don't need the liquidity, they can actually just carry on with that annuity. So as I say, life carries on, bills still need to be paid, but we facilitate that, that being one of the biggest or most powerful non-will assets that we actually facilitate. The executor doesn't get involved in that.
And so from a tax perspective, what are the estate duty implications? Luckily,
estate duty free, both on living annuities and retirement funds. So that's also a nice tax structuring avenue.
Of course. Anything that can reduce what I'm going to be paying over to the receiver. I paid enough during my living years. Thank you very much. Come at me, SARS. Now, what happens if the nominated beneficiary elects to not take the cash but maybe keep the living annuity going? Can they do that?
They can definitely do that. So that transfers tax-free into their name. They become the owner of the living annuity. They can decide on the drawdown that they need. And that's where we unpack that dependency plan for them. We draw a scenario for them based on their living costs. And the tax implications, they get taxed in their personal capacity.
Oh.
So marginal tax rates, it's seen as taxable income.
Right.
And Michael, that's why it's also very valuable getting your beneficiaries involved in this process of estate planning. Because for many people, inheritance is like the lotto. When you win it, you don't know what to do with it. And you can make bad decisions with the money because you just don't understand these things, that you could leave the money in a living annuity and you would be paying less tax. So very importantly, when they're involved in this process, they all of a sudden also know how to look after that money in a responsible way when they get it, because they've had the education, they've had the conversations. And for many people, when they're the let's say the patriarch of the family, they've taken care of all the stuff and it hasn't necessarily transferred transferred the knowledge down to the different generations. Now they leave this, and then the people don't know what to do with it. It's like the lotto, you get the money, you don't know what to do with it. So that's why the levels of involvement are so much more valuable when you're having these kind of discussions. It's the same, and we go back to, maybe the spouse that hasn't worked, hasn't been involved in all of this, and she'll say, oh, well, I don't do all this stuff, I don't want to be involved in it. But then when they inherit all of this, and I'm sorry I'm saying she, but it is more, that's more the cases that we see, they don't understand all the decisions, and it becomes so overwhelming at that time,
why
because they're
there's
stressed
the
and they're
phrase
emotional.
clogs to clogs in 3 generations, but because there hasn't been that knowledge transfer. It's such a critical point for women in particular. We have to be mindful that is the lived reality, but also for any financially dependent partner. How do you talk to couples about financial agency and that empowerment and access, also without making it feel threatening?
And it is that because when often when they come in, they think that I'm pointing out that their partner isn't doing a good job, but their partner is really doing the best that they can. But because it needs to be a shared responsibility, I share stories, and I think that is the way. I mean, I got a call the other day. Obviously, I get calls from people who've listened to the podcast or read my books, and she was in a relationship with her partner who had a lot of money, but he's passed away now, and he's left her a lot, but he had never had an estate plan. So there's absolutely no liquidity for her to be living today. So she's what Maryanne's talking about, is like looking at maybe getting this money in a year's time, but how does she live until that year's made up? Yeah. This person had all the best intentions. She's in the will to get it, but she doesn't have any access to cash right now. And it's heartbreaking, because that's not what that person meant for this woman to happen to her.
In a situation like that, are you able to approach a bank and apply for a mezzanine loan or bridging finance?
That was all that I could give her in our conversation,
costly,
is to take the will and go there. But she's got no credit record. She hasn't been active in all of this. So she's on the back foot. And to be in that situation and to be on the back foot when you are grieving. And so those are the stories that I tell. You say to me, how do I get a couple involved in it? And they're real stories. They're not made up stories. They're stories that I just share, so that even though the one person thinks that they are so kind in taking all the responsibility, they're not so kind because of the repercussions if something happens to them. And most times, those kind of conversations just actually are the aha moment for them both to realize that they both need to have equal responsibility in the estate planning. And that's our goal, is to get them into that place where they go, okay, I'm open to this, I'm open to it. Because some people are closed, so closed, they don't want to discuss it. Like, if I discuss my partner's passing, then maybe I'm bringing it on. Maybe that's going to cause them to die. Or if I discuss it with my family, then maybe my children are going to want me to pass on. So there is many emotional levels to just getting a person to comprehend the value of an estate plan.
Or they can just listen to Life Chapters Money Choices, which is a podcast of aha moments. Maryanne, I want to move it on to death and taxes, and it's something we just avoid like the plague. We don't like talking about it, but we need to understand. I mean, how does estate duty work in broad terms? There's an abatement. I think it's currently, 3.5 million rand. How does it work in broad terms before we get into some of the detail?
Okay, so Michael, death and taxes, what do we say? The only two certainties in life.
Yeah.
I like to explain estate duty as bringing those two realities together. So very much estate duty, it's a wealth tax in South Africa. And it's basically levied on anything over 3.5 million of your net estate, calculated at 20%, and it's owed. Your estate legally has to pay SARS that before any beneficiary can inherit, before the estate's wound up. So, it's prevalent for the high net worth individual. As I say, a wealth tax, and tax compliance at SARS has become so onerous that also causes delays in winding up an estate.
We've already paid so much tax through our lifetime. It really is one of those things that I find particularly galling. But you also warn that SARS may simply collect later when the surviving spouse dies. So, because I think a common planning tool is to leave everything to a spouse, because then the estate duty rolls over. but that may sometimes just be kicking the can down the road. What is the timing problem here?
So the timing very much is on first passing spouse, that's great. You've dodged the bullet. As you say, you've kicked the can down the road. Say the surviving spouse passes away 10 years later. That's 10 years worth of investment growth, property growth. And that spouse is then rubbing their hands together saying, great, I'll get more of the piece of a bigger pie. So what we could maybe look at doing, and what we sometimes do if there's a local trust involved, is leaving your abatement to the trust, even though your spouse survives you, is kind of pegging that 3.5 million of your dutiable estate, that it grows further on in a trust. And your spouse can do the same and then leave everything else to your spouse. So effectively 3.5 million to a local trust that perhaps is in the family already, and the rest to your spouse means no estate duty, and you've kind of shielded 3.5 million on your passing from future estate duty.
That's very interesting. I know there's a lot of suspicion around trusts nowadays, but that is an example of where they are still quite useful. Donations tax, I've heard, can be another useful structuring tool that is in our toolbox.
Very much so. I always like to explain to my clients, donations tax is also a wealth tax. The way I look at donations tax is an early collection of estate duty, because it's pretty much the same rate, 20% below 30 million. So what we could do, and it's all financial plan scenario dependent, but if a client, let's say, has more than enough for him and his wife, her and her husband in their lifetime, they're living according to their values, they're getting a return on life and not just investment, but there's a lot of surplus assets, and those surplus assets their children could actually do with now, paying private school fees, paying off bonds, for example. There's two ways to do it. One way is, yes, you're going to suffer a donations tax now, but you could donate some of your will assets to help them out. We like to term it giving with a warm hand. So while you're still here, and seeing them benefit from it, and create memories with them, for example. But that removes that will asset, that dutiable asset from your estate. Yes, you're going to pay donations tax of 20% above 150,000, but that's then out of your name, and it perhaps goes towards their bond or goes towards school fees, and that then's removed from your estate, versus bequeathing it to them in your will, let it grow for the next however many years, and paying more estate duty on that same will asset.
And executor fees.
Yeah. Very important.
What is the rule of thumb, speaking of executors? And often families just think, we should make it the oldest surviving sibling, or, it's a whole long spiel. When my dad died, it's not fun. It's not a job that you really want to be going and doing and spending time at the master's office and that kind of thing. But then I also think there's a lot of distrust about, who do we make our executor? What are the ins and outs of executorship?
Maybe I can come in here because I'm very passionate on it. We again, you've just said it. You choose one of your children to be this executor, or your surviving spouse, and you give them this job. The amount of families where I've seen it cause the biggest heartache, because the other children they suspect that child now that's doing the actual executorship is doing things that they shouldn't be doing. It is way better to use a neutral professional, and I say it neutral professional because it must be a professional business, that's what their job is winding up estates. Yes, you have to pay. It's 3.5% plus VAT. That's the maximum you pay. You know what the maximum is, but you can negotiate that with these professionals if you come with all your documentation. So what Maryanne is talking about, having ID numbers, having all these documents, if you've got all of it ready, many of these professional companies will then negotiate the discount with you, which becomes significant when we're talking about a lot of assets, and it takes out the emotional stress that you put onto families by choosing one and not the other. Because also it's a message. Why would you choose one child? Is it because they're cleverer with money? Is it because they're more astute? What are you saying? What is that saying about your other child? So I am one of we used to, as a business, we always just say, put somebody as your family member as your executor. We don't anymore, because we've we've seen in the practice of winding up estates how many families that didn't work for. So now we say use a professional executor and put them and nominate them in your will when you do it.
It's not fun. There's so much more to discuss in this. It's actually a very interesting area of financial planning. So, Maryanne, we're going to have you back on. But I think let's wrap it up there. If there's one kind of mindset shift that you would like listeners to take from this conversation today, what is it?
I would say, Michael, thank you for having me, first of all, and I've really enjoyed it and I'm happy to come back. But for me, it would be don't be afraid to have the conversation. I come from a family that doesn't like to talk about money, and very much it would have helped if we did, looking back. And I think that's my passion for financial and estate planning. So don't be afraid to have the conversation. Don't put it off. We've got time. Let's be brave together and walk this journey together.
Well, you're talking about two things we hate talking about. We hate talking about death, we hate talking about money, and we're bringing them into one pot. And that's exactly why we're having these courageous conversations here on Life Chapters Money Choices. So, Maryanne, Leicher, thank you very much. It's been great having you on the podcast. And Kim, as always, for bringing such humanity and warmth and insight to the conversations. Thanks so much for your time. And I think the big thing is that, for me, yes, a signed will matters, but it's certainly not enough. And the deeper question isn't simply who gets what. It's what happens next. Who has access to cash? Which assets are frozen? Which assets bypass the estate? Who's the nominated beneficiary? What taxes payable? What does the surviving spouse live on? I mean, there's so many questions, and I think we've just touched the surface. So that's why Maryanne's phrase is so powerful. Put numbers to your wishes, because wishes without numbers can create a lot of confusion, but wishes backed by proper planning can become one final act of love and clarity and protection. This has been Life Chapters Money Choices. I'm Michael Avery with Kim Potgieter and our guest Maryanne Leicher. Thanks so much for listening, and remember to like and subscribe and share wide amongst your networks. The podcast is certainly growing and getting out there, and we're loving your feedback. Take care.